It's blurry.
So the name of our webinar this evening is Remove the Armor, Cultivating Empathy in Kids. And I'm Kelly Spino. I am the Chief Organizational Learning Officer for the Children's Guild Alliance. And with me this evening is Angelique McCoy.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Angelique McCoy, and I'm the Talent Development Coordinator at the Children's Guild Alliance, and I'm also a licensed professional counselor in the state of Maryland.
And both Angelique and I work for the Transformation Education Institute, which is the Research, Development, and Training Division of the Children's Guild Alliance. So, Angelique.
Let's jump in with some housekeeping. And first, I must say, I really appreciate the sense of community we've already started to build, helping one another in just kind of using the chat function, because we will be engaging in the chat function during our time together this evening. We do want to let you know that the meeting will be recorded. We love to be able to share this out at a later date. And for those who are already asking, yes, the video will be available after the session. So if at all possible, keep your videos on and just engage with us. We would ask that if you have any questions or if you want to chat back and forth, you can definitely use the chat function. We will be using that during our presentation. And we'd also ask that everyone mute their audio. So that would be if you're on your computer and you see the microphone, press it and there'll be a red line that goes across it that tells you it's muted. And if you're on your phone, you should have a similar icon if you just tap it with your finger. That way we can eliminate a lot of the background noise and the feedback that might happen. We do understand pets and children and family members, because again, we are all home together. So we just want to make sure that we're being, mindful of our speakers. And just remember, this is a community. We are learning this new technological age together. We're walking through it together. Get ready to learn some new and interesting things, or maybe just be reminded of some things that you already knew, and stay engaged and buckle in and let's get ready for the ride.
All right, let's get started. So today's topic, empathy. Yay! All right, let's see what it's about. So we're going to start with COVID and the pandemic. And we know that when the pandemic started, there was a tremendous amount of anxiety, confusion, that jolted all of us from our normal routines. And even though there has been a period of adjustment, we still are struggling to find answers to how do we keep motivated and engaged and moving in the right direction. Many of us have had to ask the question, what really matters? So as life has become challenging, we've asked ourselves, where are our priorities and what do we need to pay attention to? And for many of us, the answer is to help others. And we saw that through all the efforts people put into helping one another, helping their neighbors, helping the elderly by doing chores and just being there for one another. So there were two things that were happening simultaneously in our environment. One was we had science, and science was adapting to what they were learning about the virus. And also we were adapting to what we were learning about the virus and what we were learning about this new normal that we were living in. So let's take a look first at what was science doing at this point. Well, we know that science is working on a vaccine, and there's anything from October to 2021 before we get the vaccine. We know that there's been lots of medical interventions. And at the beginning, if you remember, there was a tremendous amount of difficulty getting the machines and the equipment that was needed. We were having difficulty with testing, but now testing is readily available. And the CDC came out and said, we're asking the public to wear masks, to socially distance themselves, to avoid crowded spaces, and if suspected of having contact with somebody that had COVID, to isolate yourself for the necessary period of time. Now let's take a look at what did we do? Well, in March and April, we stayed home, we distanced, and we saw those numbers going down. And so the federal and local governments were monitoring how well we were doing. But they also made sure that they made us very aware that there were several populations at risk. The elderly, those with disabilities, with compromised immune, and even people of color were more at risk. And they made sure that those numbers were apparent to all of us. And they also made sure that we knew in the news that there were countries that were having a lot of success with this. So they were having a decrease in the spread in Asia and Europe and over in Oceania. But what happened in America? Well, as one of the bloggers wrote, as the death rate drops and people feel safer, lower risk people will be even more cavalier about getting back to their lives. Science is not the missing ingredient in beating this virus. Empathy is. And as we think about what happened in our society, as we started to give more leniency to going out, we saw large crowds of people, whether they're gathering at the beach or for get-togethers, and we saw our numbers spike. And people began to say things like, we're entitled to go out in the community. And this empathy of we're all in it together suddenly became, this is about me, and I need to go out and return to my normal life. Wow, how did we get here? From the hashtag of we're all in it together to I don't care, I'm going out and I'm going to get together with my friends and family. Well, let's take a look. How did this change? There's a couple things that happen. We know that we are wired for connection, that we need to feel connected and have relationships in order to survive, just as much as we need food and shelter and safety. But we also know that over the last 50 years, society has been growing more and more prosperous and very individualistic. And our social connections have been dissolving. People are more concerned of getting ahead in life than forming those connections and taking time to spend with their loved ones. And then in 1999, social media became the main way of connecting, and people began to hide behind profiles, leaving many people feeling very isolated and insignificant. It was all about how many friends you had on Facebook, and people began to feel very isolated.
So let's go to the chat and let's engage in our first activity for the evening. We've talked about some of the things that we've noticed that have changed, but what else do you think? How else has society changed during this time? Feel free to just jot your thoughts down in the chat section. Mm, yeah. Wow. Yeah, we've got everything from waiting in line to go to stores. People are less friendly and quick to judge on social media, polarization, life just completely slowing down. Of course, the big one, fear. We know education has changed and it looks like technology is playing a role in that. Wow, less participation in community. And then basic human conveniences. And wow, thank you so much. Politics, there we go again. Yes, that lack of trust. And yes, people are angry. And here's a big one that we sometimes don't think about, the spike in opioid death. Lots of death. Feeling alone. So it's been pretty bleak. One of those changes has just been the hostility is up and depression. Wow, thank you all so much. Racial equity and equality is down, and spike in domestic violence and depression and hopelessness. Wow, people can't see the smile anymore because of the masks. Thank you all for sharing, and you can continue to pour those thoughts into the chat as we move forward. Wow. Oh, I miss hugs and faces too. whoever just said that. I miss them as well. Back to you, Kel.
All right. Next slide, Diane. All right. So as our world changed, perfectionism has been commodified. It's all about this idea of showing your best face forward, being what people want you to be. And so the thinking became, if I am perfect, I will be accepted and loved, because society really values those that are perfect, those that have the certain look, the certain car, the certain outfit. And so what happened is, as we began to feel this need to be perfect in order to be acceptable or loved by others, we began to hide. And so with that, we began to put on our armor, resulting in protecting ourselves from others. So the more we tried in, the more we hide behind our armor. So we're going to take a look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And, you know, for many of us, we've seen this for such a long time. And what he talks about are the basic needs in life. And so physical safety and safety are the two that are prominent, and they are kind of the underground of a good solid upbringing. We all need to feel safe, and we all need to have food, shelter, and clothing. But then comes the psychological needs. And the need for love and belonging stresses this idea that you are loved unconditionally and that you belong to a family that loves you unconditionally and is there for you no matter what. And that then gives you the esteem to strive for your goals and to move on. But one of the things that Maslow tells us is that in order to advance, we have to sort of master each of these stages, not in complete mastery, but somewhat mastered before we move on. So when we get to adolescence, we find that love and belonging really is about fitting in. And we know that middle schoolers in particular have this intense desire to fit in and boost their esteem. Because as they go through puberty and as life changes from the nurturing elementary school to the getting ready for high school, middle school environment, they have to figure out, how does love, belonging, and esteem work? And for many of them, it's about a reputation. And so in order to have that reputation, they have to fit in. So how do we reconnect? What Brene Brown tells us is that I define connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. So if we want to be able to reconnect, we've got to be able to remove that armor and unleash that power of empathy. So now let's take it to the brain for a second. Neuroscientists told us that we are all wired to connect with other human beings, and that we have what's called a mirror neuron located throughout our brain. And as we are in conversation and connecting with another person, our mirror neurons are interacting with theirs. And this becomes that underpinning for this idea of empathy, by being able to understand how another person is feeling at that moment.
So the question is, what is empathy? We've been talking about it, and we really want to kind of peel back some of those layers and figure out how it is developed. When we think about empathy, think about the ability to see things from someone else's perspective. where you're able to put aside your personal feelings and to put aside judgment of what you feel is right or you feel is wrong. And you're really able to understand that person's feelings and then be able to communicate to them, hey, I get it. I understand. And while it's not an easy thing to cultivate, being empathetic, it's not just something we automatically wake up and do or that we're born with or that it's innately within us. But the good news is that it can be developed. So, empathy is what you feel for another and being able to actually put yourself as a witness to someone else's pain. We often hear the saying, put yourself in someone else's shoes. And empathy is really walking a mile in those shoes. And it's not just for the unpleasant feelings. It's not just for the times that we experience loss or pain or hurt, but I can be empathetic to someone's happiness and to someone's joy and be able to experience in a way that it becomes my own. That's what empathy is. But then we often hear the term sympathy and often feel that they are either one and the same or that they're interchangeable, but they are very different. Sympathy is understanding what that person is going through, but not necessarily feeling the emotions that are attached to what that person is feeling. For example, if you were trying to show empathy with someone, you might say it sounds like you're upset or it looks like you're hurt or it feels like this thing is really heavy on you. But with sympathy, you would just most likely say, I'm sorry you're feeling that way. Or I'm sorry that you're going through that. I agree that is tough because sympathy is understanding and it's imagining what that person could be going through, but it's not the same as actually bearing the weight of that emotion. So that's the difference between sympathy and empathy. But then there's the concept of compassion. And compassion is all about showing kindness. It's what we need the most now. It's about being considerate for others, especially when they are upset and they are hurt and they are going through. And it's about being genuine and authentic in what they are feeling. And the thing that I appreciate about compassion is that compassion drives you to help alleviate that person's suffering. It is beyond a feeling, and compassion then takes on a life of its own and it becomes movement. So when we look at all of those together, it's really about how we engage. We don't want to have pity for one another. We don't need to feel sorry for one another because we're all in different stages at life. And some of us are sympathetic to what the other is going through, especially when we're in this time of this COVID and the stay at home and our kids are struggling and our families are struggling. We care that there are people around us, that there are neighbors who are going through things. But then we build on that empathy and we begin to feel the suffering of one another. We knock on each other's doors and it becomes compassion. What can I do for you today? I want to help relieve your suffering. So you move from a feeling to an emotion that you've taken on your own to an actual engagement of where that compassion takes life and it takes off running and you do what you can to help relieve the suffering. So we want to move today. We want to move and we want to understand the differences so that we'll be able to apply them in a truly effective way. So remember, empathy is very tough. There are people who are just naturally empathic. And I sometimes in one of those individuals, I can see someone crying and I will immediately begin to feel their emotion. I can watch a movie and I already know what's going to happen. I already know the scene and I'm already welled up as it's starting to happen because of the empathy of what the actors are portraying. So you want to realize that empathy can also bring on a level of burnout. And this is kind of the disclaimer. There is a level of burnout that is associated with deep levels of empathy, sympathy, and compassion. But we've got some tools here to help you to cultivate your empathy in a way that it doesn't become burdensome to you. One of those tools is that you shift the process of being empathetic to a skill. So it's something that you practice. It's something that you hone instead of it being a feeling, because we know that our feelings and our emotions can definitely run away with us. And then you learn how to set clear boundaries when you're being empathetic. And very importantly, don't take things personally. What others are feeling in most instances is not being personally directed towards you, even if it's coming off that way. Sometimes our emotions have a way of taking over and we don't realize that they're coming off as if we are shifting the blame to someone else. And then importantly, believe in the power of individuals to save themselves. We are amazing creatures. Human beings have the capacity to love and to create and to care for one another as long as we believe that we can. And if you begin to hone your empathy in that way, it will not become burdensome, but it will become something that you want to do, something that you want to share, something that will move you towards that compassion of actually putting action behind those feelings.
All right. So empathy is the skill or the ability to tap into your own experiences in order to connect with an experience someone is relating to us. Compassion is the willingness to be open to the process. And I think that really comes to what Angelique was sharing about that compassion is the action step. So we know that we are all wired to tell stories. And our own story is where we need to begin. We have to change the narrative. We know that connection requires the ability to be authentic in our ability to share our story. We need to have vulnerability and the courage to be vulnerable with one another when we share our story. So now let's unpack this a little bit. We want to begin to think about these connections. And in order to do that, we need to unpack this idea of empathy versus shame. And they are the polar opposite of each other. When there is shame, there is this feeling that I'm alone. I have to put on my armor and be the person you think I am or that you want me to be because I'm not good enough. I have lots of imperfections and I don't want you to see that. So my narrative is built up of the story you want to hear. And on the other side is empathy. And with empathy, it says, I accept the fact that I have lots of imperfections, but I understand that I can work on my imperfections and people will love me regardless of them. And vulnerability is that lever in the middle that helps us to become either more connected by being empathetic with each other or to be disconnected. So the more that we are in the absence of fear, we're able to be vulnerable and share our true self. And we're able to say to each other, you know what? I really messed up this time. I am ashamed of the way I handled that. That was all wrong. I shouldn't have done that. And when you own the shame, you're being able to be vulnerable and receive empathy from one another. And you have that power to decide, are you going to tell your true narrative and release that shame? Or are you going to live in the area of shame and close off your true connection and relationships with one another? So shame breeds three things. The first is fear. And we know from other webinars that we've done that when there is fear in your brain, that's when your amygdala goes, uh-oh, I can't deal with this. I don't know what to do. And when that amygdala is in that fear zone, what happens is your brain has to go to protection. And that protection could be backing up from the other person, running away, or saying something hostile and hurtful to protect yourself. The next thing that shame breeds is disconnection. Because if I have to put on a mask to be with you, I'm not being my real self. And our relationship isn't built on authenticity, but it's based on this facade that I create so you will like me. And that third is blame. And if we are in this process of blaming one another, then we're not accepting our own imperfections and being vulnerable to the fact that we're not always right. And it's okay to be wrong. So when we are doing this shame game, one of these three things happens to our individuals. Shame cannot survive being spoken. It cannot survive empathy. So in other words, when we are authentic and vulnerable with one another, we're owning our shame. And our shame becomes an acceptance of the fact that we're not perfect. And you're still going to care about me even if I'm not perfect. We're not alone. So how do we change this shame to acceptance? And here's my favorite little guy who says, how do we do that? Let's take a look. One of the ways we do it is called myelination. And myelination is when the nerve cells in our brain transmit information over a period of time. And the more that we transmit a particular message, it creates this myelinated sheath, which is kind of like a speedway in our brain. So it's going from like an unpaved road, which you go slow until you learn it and master it, to a speedway where you can go 65, 75 miles an hour because it's a known entity and you have a way of relating to it. So now let's take a look at this neuroplasticity. All that is a process in the brain where your neurons are connecting. And the more they connect, the stronger they become. The more you practice it, the stronger that connection. So for instance, when you were trying to learn your multiplication tables in school, the more you practiced it, the more you myelinated that neuron. So now as an adult, you don't have to take your hands and take off your shoes and use your fingers and your toes to count because you know how to do that. Well, at least most of us. Sometimes I still have to practice. But that becomes that myelinated sheath. And the more we practice something, it becomes ingrained in our thinking. So if you want to myelinate this idea of, I'm a bad person, people don't like me, I'm alone, which is what shame is about, that's what you believe. So the more we practice receiving the empathic response, which is understanding the pain, is accepting the fact that you're not perfect, and being here to support you as you go through that pain and suffering, we begin to change our own belief system about ourselves and how we respond. So let's take a look at an example. So this is a student who didn't do well on a test. And this parent says, you didn't do well on the test because you didn't study enough. And so immediately the child disconnects, puts her fingers in the air. She doesn't want to hear it. But in this scenario, this parent says, I'm sure you're disappointed that you didn't do well on the test. Next time, I think we should develop a study plan to help you prepare. So acknowledge the fact that you're disappointed, and now let's come up with a plan. So acceptance and acknowledgement of our imperfection leads us to becoming more vulnerable with one another, more authentic with one another, and much more connected in a real way. So did you know that empathy, the awareness of the ability to share the feelings of others, can be very abstract and very, very difficult to teach, particularly young children, but it can be done.
And so how do we start to even begin to help our children's brains myelinate this particular skill? The first tool or tip that we have for you this evening is that We provide them support so that they can help themselves build strong self-regulation skills. We know that at that young age, because their executive functioning skills are not fully at the capacity where they would be able to do this on their own, us providing that support as caregivers, as parents, as teachers, helps them to feel emotionally and physically supported. And then it will allow them to take those emotional risks because they know that there's a safety net. There's that adult there that is ready to catch them, ready to motivate them, ready to show empathy when it doesn't quite work out the way that they want it to work out.
Tip number 2, understand how feelings of guilt and shame can affect a child's empathic response. So when we feel ashamed or targeted by blame, we don't respond in a pro-social way. We again need to protect ourselves. So if we accept the shame, we feel helpless, worthless. If we reject the shame, we feel angry, resentful. And research shows that shame makes us reach out to victims and respond in ways that are uncaring and even aggressive. And I want us to think a little bit about the social unjust in our world and how much of that is the result of shame. We want our kids to respond with empathy. We need to avoid feelings of shame.
And while we're avoiding those feelings of shame, tip number 3 is to put aside judgment. So when we sense that our child is going through a specific emotion that might not be as positive, like anger or frustration, the empathetic response is, you're frustrated, I get it, I would be too. I understand you're upset. It would upset me as well. Not only are you allowing that child to see the vulnerability of who you are as an adult, but you're also developing connections. And we talked earlier on about the importance of those connections. And just knowing that you as an adult can take that judgment and cast it to the side gives that child the ability, and it empowers them almost like a superpower so that they can carry on in whatever it is in processing that they need to do.
All right, so tip number 4 is don't try to fix the problem, honor the pain. And this might sound a little counterintuitive to what we do as caretakers and parents, teachers. What we oftentimes try to do is we try to fix the problem for our children. So instead of letting them kind of deal with the pain and just acknowledging it, we try to go in and rescue them. And by rescuing them, we really deny them an opportunity for growth. Empathy in and of itself is a healing process. So rather than go in and try to fix the predicament for the child, what we want to do is go in and help them, A, understand the emotion that they're feeling, and then deal with the consequence of that emotion so they can get to a point of problem solving. What's the right thing to do to solve this problem?
Tip number 5 is a fun one. Help children discover what they have in common with other people. Let's just think about race, and let's think about the social injustice and all those things that are happening in the world. We shouldn't shelter our children from such discussions, but we should find a way to build on the commonalities. We should talk openly about things like racial biases and injustice in order to teach our children what is happening in the world, but also that we are all kind of woven together and going through this from different vantage points, but again, able to build that sense of, I understand how you feel.
So some empathy activities that you can try at home or in the classroom is, one is using literature. One is taking a look at the books that are out there written about empathy that are directly teaching the skill of how to show empathy, but then also using characters in a book to figure out, how do you think that person felt? and trying to gain perspective of what was that experience like for that individual, so that the book and the story takes on a different meaning when they're really starting to connect to the characters. Another activity you could do is reflective journaling, and asking children to really think about, how would you deal with that situation? How do you think they felt? What would you say to someone that told you this? So helping them to think through what they're, not only how they're feeling, but how they might act in that situation. And then, of course, creating those opportunities for kids to practice empathy, whether it's, you know, doing something for others, which is that compassion piece, or even just practicing reading other people's emotions or listening to other people tell their story and trying to feel what it might feel like to have lived in that period of time, or having lived through that situation. And those are just great opportunities for kids to not only experience empathy, but to practice showing it to others. So tip number 6 is perspective taking. And it's looking at, how do we nurture this form of empathy so that our children are able to think outside of themselves and really take on somebody else's perspective. We have a couple of ideas for that. So let's take a look at this. In number 1, and you can unmute yourself and kind of shout out an answer if you think that. What are the 2 things that you see in that picture?
There's an upside down queen and an old lady.
Okay, does everybody see those?
Yeah.
All right, how about number 2? How many poles are there?
3.
I heard 1, 3, but it wasn't a very confident one, that's
3.
for sure.
It's 3.
All right.
3.
3 square and 3 round.
My screen
Right.
is black.
There's 2 or 3.
Oh.
There's 2.
So some of you say, some of you are saying 3. That's called perspective taking. How about number 3? What are the 2 images that you see in number 3?
2 faces or a vase.
Right.
1 upside down.
Okay. And then how about number 4? What do you notice about the 2 long lines?
You're vertical
Mhm.
horizontal.
They're parallel.
They're parallel. So again,
They look like they're curved. They look like they're curved.
They do look like they're curved.
right.
Not straight.
So some people are going to say, no, they're absolutely straight. And other people are going to say, no, they're curved in the middle.
Right.
So, but this is a great way to get people to understand it's about perspective. And I don't know if you remember that there was that challenge that was going around about the dress and what color the dress was, whether it was blue and gold or
Right.
kind of the same idea, different perspectives. So let's take a look at another example about this. And this just kind of a worksheet of trying to see the other side. So you, in this particular situation, they ask simple things like, what's the best type of food? And my response could be,
What did I do?
in this case, it looks like they wrote pasta with meatballs. And then another perspective would be pizza. So it's getting people to understand that it's not right or wrong, it's a different perspective. And we always have to begin with perspectives in order to understand where the other person's coming from. So these are just a couple of activities that we do. And then when you walk a mile in their shoes is really helping children with this idea of storytelling and understand someone else's story before you make judgment on them for something they've done or said.
That 7th tip is helping children improve their face reading skills. How often do we as adults gaze upon one another and not know really what that other person is feeling or misinterpret those feelings are? So we have a little fun for you now. we're going to kind of look at some faces and see if we can really read faces well enough to help our kids to be able to read faces well enough. So we're going to show you a face. I want you to go to the poll, which you'll see show up. And is he overjoyed, upset, excited, or do you think he's angry? So here comes the face.
Excited.
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 There's your
Excited.
poll, so use your poll. There you go. There you go. Lots of voting. Awesome. Looks like excited is taking the winner spot. Awesome.
Well, some people would say
This is great. Yeah, some people actually think he might be upset. That you never know what a face looks like until you ask them what they're going through, right?
Right.
That's awesome. So we've pretty much got about most of our polling, and it looks like it was about 80% of you thought that he was excited. So that's a good exercise to help your students and your children really begin to read faces and to figure out what people are thinking. I think we have one more for you. Let's see if she's feeling mischievous, frustrated, nervous, or confused.
Confused.
And here comes the poll. We're gonna vote again. Okay, we're over the halfway mark. Looks like most of us are starting to think that she's mischievous. Guess the biting of the lip is probably giving it away and making us feel like, you know, she's got a little going on. But this is just really to help us as adults begin to really sharpen this skill for ourselves so that we can then be of help to our children as they are beginning to read those faces. And sometimes we look at our kids and they don't know if we're upset or if we're disappointed or if we're angry. And so this is a good way to build empathy in a child, because when they know what you're feeling by your face, they will better be able to respond.
I think we have one more, Angelique.
Oh, awesome. Let's go for it. So is he feeling curious, bored, nervous, or afraid? Poll will come up shortly. There you go. Vote away. Looks like it's going to be neck and neck between curiousness and nervousness.
Yeah.
So it looks like 46% of you thought that he was curious. One of the tools that you can use to kind of help your children and your students start that process of learning how to face read is that you can have them focus on specific parts of the face. So start with the eyes. Our eyes usually tell more than we want our eyes to tell. And then you can have them notice the lips. Are they curved? Are they curled under? Are they curled up? Are they about to smile? And even have them look at the nose. Sometimes our nostrils flare when we're angry or when we're upset, or we have a very relaxed facial posture. And then importantly, look at those eyebrows. Most of the time, our eyebrows will also give away what we're feeling. And I love someone in the chat said the biting of the lip and even the overall posture. But these are tools that we can use to help teach this particular skill of face reading to our students and our children.
All right, so one of the ways we can practice reading emotions is through stories. And as I was doing the research, I came across this book and I fell in love with it. So it's called The Day the Crayons Quit. And poor Duncan just wants to color, but when he opens his box of crayons, he finds only letters, all saying the same thing. His crayons have had enough. They quit. Beige crayon is tired of playing second fiddle to brown crayon. Black wants to be used for more than just outlining. Blue needs a break from coloring all those bodies of water. And orange and yellow are no longer speaking. Each believes he is the true color of the sun. What can Duncan possibly do to appease all of the crayons and get them back to doing what they do best? And so it's a great way for kids to associate feelings with colors and then looking at the obstacles that get in the way of their relationships and how they can solve that. And there's lots of books out there. Here's another one that is I Am Human, and it's a book of empathy. And this is actually on the New York Best Times bestseller list. And another one has to do with the color monster and a story about emotions. And these are just great tools that you can use to teach empathy with kids as they begin to try to experience what the other person is feeling so that they know how to respond in a way that aligns with the individual and helps release that vulnerability of accepting them for their imperfections. So the power of empathy. I'm in it with you. I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to feel with you and let you know you're not alone. Brene Brown does a tremendous amount of work around shame, courage, and empathy. And if you haven't watched any of our YouTube videos, I encourage you to do so. All right, so now it's time for us to do a little bit of work. You've heard us talk about the importance of connection and that our brains are wired to connect. And that in order for us to be empathic with one another, we have to be able to show our imperfections. We have to be able to honor the pain of each other and support one another as we work through that. And now what I want you to do is think about a time when someone has helped you do that. Think about a time when you were ashamed of something that happened. And you turned to someone to tell the truth of your story. And what I want you to do right now is I want you to take out your cell phone. And I want you to open your cell phone. And I want you to message the person that was there for you and thank them for the empathic response they gave you. So let's all take a minute, reach out to that person that helped you to connect and be authentic, and thank them for being there for you.
Sometimes in our lives, we all have pain, we all have sorrow. But if we are wise, we know that there's always tomorrow. Lean on me when you're not strong. I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on. For it won't be long till I'm gonna need somebody to lean on. Please swallow your pride. If I have pain, you need to borrow. For no one can feel those of your needs that you won't let you. You just call on me, brother, when you need a hand. We all need somebody to lean on. I just might have a problem that you'll understand. We all need somebody to lean on.
All right, I hope you had enough time to finish your text and send that off and thank that person for being there for you and allowing you to tell your authentic story.
Lean on me.
And And if we were probably all unmuted right now, hopefully we would be hearing a lot of pings and our phones would be going off, and those individuals would be probably saying, well, what happened? Why'd you text me? Or they'd just be saying, no problem. You know, you just never know. But it's really important that we really begin to cultivate worldwide empathy, because it's really about showing compassion. As a matter of fact, I texted 2 people and one has responded, and first thing she said was, of course, what else would I do? And I just thanked her for being there for me in those times that were tough, because it helps us to grow. It helps us to develop that peace, and then it helps us ultimately to exist together in a way that is cohesive. Worldwide empathy. Let's teach it to our kids. Oh, I love that. Someone in the chat got, that's what friends are for. Absolutely. Absolutely.
One of the resources that we're putting up, and this will be available for you afterward, it is a way to look at empathic strategies throughout the developmental ages. So it's just an article that I thought would be helpful if you're trying to find specific activities for specific ages of the children that you work with or your own children. So we encourage you to visit our website for resources. Today's PowerPoint and the recording will be up there. We also have lots of articles. If you haven't signed up for our brainwaves, please do so. We will be having an October webinar, but not sure of the date yet, so stay tuned for that. The recordings are typically up in about 7 to 10 days. We want to invite you all to take a look at our national conference that's coming up, October 26th and 27th. We will be hosting the children's first virtual national conference. There's a particular strand in there for families, and there's also a special price code for parents, which is only $39 for 2 days. We will have over 150 presenters that will all be virtual and will be available asynchronously after the conference is over. So you will have, I think, until the end of November to review every session if you want. But here are just a few that we thought we'd highlight for you that have to do with families and working with children. Please visit our website at thekidsfirstconference.org to register for the conference and also take a look at some of the other presentations. So if you have questions or comments, feel free to send those to us at info@transed.org. We'd love to hear from you, and happy to answer any questions that may come up.
And as always, we appreciate your taking your time out of your evening schedule to join us and to really just collaborate and learn and grow together. And we hope to see you next month.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you. Great job,
Thanks.
Alex. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
I clicked it.
You too.
Thank you very
Be
much.
safe.